Well, Reiner, welcome to Inside Personal Growth. And for all my listeners, they've heard me say this thousands of times. They must have. I've almost done 1,000 podcasts in the 15 years. Welcome to Inside Personal Growth for all of you who are listening today. From Atlanta, joining us is Reiner Lomb. Lomb? So I say it right?
Lomb. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And his new book is called Aspire. And the subtitle is 7 Essential Emotions for Leading Positive Change No Matter Where You Are. This book is really a wonderful book. I would say of all the conscious leaders, the way that Reiner has written this, it's for those of you who are, I would call, conscious leaders. Now, I'm going to let them know a bit about you. Reiner is the founder of BoomerangCoach, an executive coaching firm specializing in leadership and career development, innovation, and transformational change. Reiner's mission is to mobilize and develop leaders to create a more sustainable and positive future for all. As an executive coach, he works with leaders and change makers in a wide range of organizations, from startup and multinational companies to nonprofits and local communities, all who aspire to create transformational change. Whether he's working with corporate executive entrepreneurs, and genius trailblazers, Reiner's clients appreciate his international business and cross-cultural leadership expertise. You can find out more about Reiner by going to Reiner, ReinerLomb.com. That's Reiner Lomb, LOMB.com. So we'll put a link to that in the blog as well. We'll also put a link to maybe some other things that Reiner wants us to. But here's the book. You get it on Amazon. You can see this at Reiner's website as well. He's got it in both the paperback version as well as a Kindle version. So that's made available to anybody who wants to get that book. Now, Reiner, I think we'll just start the book off with the story about being in Cuba. I thought that was interesting, and hearing the cheering out from your hotel window that the wall had fallen. All of my listeners may or may not know, but they could probably recognize from your name that he's German. And you didn't live that far from the wall. And actually, I have a little story. When I was very young, 18, and I'm now 68, I actually crossed Checkpoint Charlie, and I went to the other side, and I could see these huge differences between East and West Germany. It almost seemed like very gray on the other side. When you walked over there, it was gray, and it was like the people didn't seem very enthusiastic. But can you tell us this great story and the correlation you make between the physical wall falling and between East and West Germany and the divide that has occurred? Now, here's the correlation here in the U.S. And while not physical divide, that our emotions are what are dividing us, and what you believe needs to happen for the leaders, not only in our country, but every country. I mean, we can say this about Russia as well. Ukraine, look at the great divides that are occurring. But I would agree with you. There is, obviously, we all know, huge divide in this country, the U.S., around political views. And it seems to be gotten bigger and bigger.
Yeah, thank you, Craig. Thanks. First of all, thank you for having me. It's really a pleasure. I've been looking forward to this conversation. This question that you're asking brings me back to November 9th, 1989. I was in Cuba. I just had, I was at the end of a 4-week trip around the island. At that time, there was not a lot of tourism in Cuba yet. It didn't have the infrastructure. It was still very an adventure to travel on your own. And so just taking a couple of days resting near Havana at the beach before going back to Germany. And I didn't, Cuba didn't have Western media there. The newspapers were local and very restricted. And then also the TV and everything was just local Cuban TV and radio and so on. So I hadn't really followed the development in Germany and in Europe for about 4 weeks. So that was that night was just about like trying to sleep. I was just like halfway falling asleep, and then suddenly heard loud cheering and loud noise outside, like party noise, like really uncomfortable. So I thought, should I get up or not? And I decided I get up and I would politely ask the people to be a little bit more quiet so that we could sleep. And as I opened the door, like all these faces, ecstatic faces, like shouting at me, the wall came down. The wall, they said actually, die Mauer ist gefallen. So actually, I, I didn't get to talk to them. I turned around, I closed the door and said to my wife, they are so drunk, they believe the wall has come down. So I went to bed that night, not believing what I had heard. Because I grew up only with the wall. I grew up with the Iron Curtain. I was drafted into the Air Force, being stationed near the Iron Curtain to the Czech Republic, where my mother comes from originally. And we had relatives on the other side in East Germany and in the Czech Republic as well. And so I just had grown up with this wall and with the Iron Curtain that I took it for granted and say, this is never going to change in my lifetime. I really believe that. So that's how big the surprise was. It took me really a little bit more the next couple of days to digest that. And then obviously when I came back to Germany, then I realized how real it was. But it took me a while really to believe it. Now, so I grew up in a divided country. I grew up on the western side of Germany, very close to the border to East Germany. We would very often hike along the fences and the barriers, and there were the watchtowers. People very often, when they tried to flee from the east to the west, were killed or hurt or put in jail. We saw that sometimes on West German TV, bloody faces or dead people and things like that. So it was a real thing we were growing up with, and so that's why that was so unbelievable that this would ever change, understanding the political circumstances, the power of the Soviet Union.
It's kind of hard to believe the oppression, the oppression of the people. And then, obviously the desire. I think they get so brainwashed after a while that they believe that's all there is. But the reality is it was good to see it fall. And I think that same thing holds true when we're talking about the politics that divide a country and its people, because it's a consciousness, right? It's a consciousness that pervades. Here you are in Cuba saying, I never thought this would fall. I thought it would be there all my life. Yet you saw a shift in consciousness enough that governments and people came together and saw that that particular belief did not serve Germany. And I'm going to this question for this reason. What do you believe is not serving us here in the US today as a result of what we're doing? Because you're a conscious leader.
Yeah, it's a very good question. I mean, I live now in the United States. I have been living here for nearly 29 years. And yes, I grew up in a country that was physically divided, but now I live in a country that is divided by emotions, a wall of emotions. But these are emotions like resentment, distrust, even hatred, as we see in all these repeated and sad and shocking mass shootings, right? So these are the emotions that divide us. And the question that you're asking is, how can we raise consciousness to overcome them? So the question is overall is like, how do we raise the consciousness? The consciousness of the leaders that ended the Cold War, it was a raise in consciousness, right? To enable that, we had a change in government in the Soviet Union with Gorbachev. We had also a change in consciousness in Western leaders. And so a lot of things happened there. So I believe leadership plays a big role here. I think the leadership in this country has contributed to the divisiveness. And the leadership can also help overcome the divisiveness and bring us together.
so true. And that holds true for business as well. In other words, you're working inside of businesses all the time. And when you get a team or a couple of teams where there's conflict, or you get a mixed message, the way the message is sent from a leader down to the rank and file people within a company. I mean, you worked for HP for years and very successfully. You speak about our aspirational leadership model and that it's essential for creating a vision of a new future and influencing people to change their behaviors to make that vision a reality. In your estimation, how can we help leaders shift their beliefs and perspectives about what is causing the divisiveness that is creating the issues that we're now facing?
Yeah, this is a good question. This is really the core of the question in terms of leadership. I believe that if we change leadership, if we change consciousness, we can overcome the divisiveness. The one very effective way in overcoming it, and I see that in the society, in communities. I have been also an activist on climate. I have been an activist in Germany, anti-Nazi activist when I was young, in my younger years. In my hometown, and I have been in Colorado climate activist for many, many years. So I've seen it in communities, but also in corporations, how to overcome divisiveness. And one approach that I find very effective, if we go high enough in terms of human needs, if we go to our highest aspirations, we can find common ground. So give you an example, like if we create the awareness and consciousness that we have only one planet, and that we all need that planet to be healthy in a certain way, so that future generations can still exist, which means our children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren and so on. Now, if you have a conversation between two leaders and you get them to this conversation, you will have an effect, because everybody cares about that, unless there's some other mental health issue, right? Or some other evil intent. But if there's somebody, regular person, the vast majority of people will listen to that if it happens in the right context and the right in a respectful conversation. Let's talk about these higher aspirations. And I see that when I facilitate innovation workshops or vision workshops in companies, if there's a divisive leadership team, if I bring them high enough in terms of their aspirations, the impact they want to have on the world with their company, there's common ground. They can find common ground.
It's very important what you're saying, and I think this. You said you were an environmental movement and activist in Colorado, and I think what we're seeing, and it's just my perspective, is if the Native American Indians who first founded this country, they believe in Mother Earth. They believe that Earth now is the way that we've taken from it, and many of us do. She has had enough. This climate change, which is affecting global warming, which is affecting the fires, we're seeing flooding. We're seeing all these elements associated with the fallout of how we actually have treated this earth overall. And I think as leaders, when the summit came together in Paris, and then Trump said no, and then Biden came back in again, and we're talking about one issue here, but it's important to get the collective consciousness of a group of people together to actually make this monumental transition. Now, social biologists, who I recently had here, one called On the Verge, she basically said to me, we collect all this data. We can predict when it's going to rain, where it's going to rain, how much it's going to rain. We have all this data that we pull together. We can predict the heat waves. We can predict a lot of this thing pretty accurately. The challenge is, as a species, as we've watched over thousands of years, we wait until it's almost catastrophic to take action. And I'm going to go down to the action part. How is it that we have to wait so long? And this brings me to your 7 essential leadership behaviors and emotions. Because the first one you discuss is empathy. And I believe that empathy and compassion are the only two things that will save our world, okay, collectively. You call it the gate to caring. And you mention in a culture where empathy is shown, there is a genuine interest in caring for the well-being of others. Key point. How do you help organizations and the people in those organizations to become more empathetic and caring, not only for all the stakeholders? We're talking about all the stakeholders. You know, and a good example of this, and then I want you to answer this question, is I happen to do coaching with people as well. And I'm in the boardroom and the CEO comes in, and I've never seen him, you know, he's in his 60s. And he was crying. And he was crying because an employee who he trusted, he found out was not doing the right things by the customers, meaning he was raising the prices and trying to jack up his sales and do whatever. And so I didn't hire people or trust in people to do this. And I'd never seen a CEO get so upset over an action that someone in his company had taken that had upset him enough that, you know, at the moment he was actually ready to fire this guy. But my point is, that's the kind of thing we're talking about here, right? That is it.
Yeah.
And so how do you help organizations become this empathetic, understanding of the clients, understanding of the vendors, understanding of the organization, understanding the fellow employees? Would be the great elixir?
Yeah, no, this is at the core of our relationships, no? That the fabric of our life, no matter where we are, in families, in communities, in companies, in whole society. And so I go up a little bit, and this relates to what I suggest as an approach and as a solution. I go up on a farm, in a small village, in a family business. And so everybody was treated like family and friends, kind of. It doesn't matter if clients or employees or anybody that was helping and so on. That's what I grew up with. That's what I took to the corporate world. So that kind of attitude that everybody is a human being who deserves respect, who deserves help, empathy, care, compassion. And one of the things that I observed, I managed large global teams for many, many years at HP and the HP software business. And very often I ran into these conflicts between people that didn't know each other. They worked in different countries. They were part of my team, but they hadn't gotten to know each other yet as a human being, is to bring them together from time to time in a location and design experiences where they can get to know each other, not just as work colleagues, not as in their role as a sales manager or as a marketing manager or whatever, but in their as a human being. So if they probably in that time, like, so sometimes we would cook together. Okay, so there was an experience to create together, people cooking side by side the whole day and then eating a meal at the end of the day. During that time, the conversations that occurred, getting to know each other, they found out, oh, I have similar issues. I have children. I worry about them growing up. You know, I have parents, aging parents that need care. You know, I'm worried about, you know, what in our city is going on and things like that. So people got to know each other as human beings. When we left these events, a lot of the conflicts that they had before, they came to me with and say why they couldn't work with this person, or it's hard to work with this person, went away once they were able to empathize and care for each other as human beings.
It's so true. And I think, you know, this next one, which is the second essential leadership behavior, is compassion. You know, and the Dalai Lama talks about compassion, you know, and also this latest book by Stephen Kotler, it talks about, you know, all the problems that we're having globally, right? But that one of the only thing that's going to fix it is compassion for one another. And I looked at that, I didn't question it, but I said, you know, really there's something very connecting to have that kind of compassion. So the commitment to serving, you state that compassion is the emotion that drives one to commit to serving the needs of another person. And I would actually even say to serve the needs of issues that we've created that globally are going to create problems. So this person or the people. So what are the characteristics inherent in a leader that is compassionate and wants to serve? I mean, we talk about the models, the inverse model of leadership, right? So a leader is here to serve the people. It used to be in the olden days, people thought, well, no, the people were there to serve the leader. And that model's been around for a long time, and there's many schools out there that teach that, the servant leadership model. Speak with us about this compassion and the servant leadership model.
Well, the question, why am I leading? Why do I want to be a leader? Why do I step forward and say I want to lead in a specific situation, in an organization or in society? The why is very important. Do I do it for me, to advance, to have more power, to have more money, or, you know, the more egoistic reason, or do I do it for the greater good, right? Whatever the greater good means. So that's a very important, the motivation is very important. I would say as a characteristic, empathy and caring, that's a foundation. So that's embedded, that's part of compassion. So without empathy and comparing, there can be no compassion. Now, what add compassion, and I'm talking compassion as an emotion, not as a virtue, as an emotion, because religions teach it as a virtue for thousands of years, but we haven't gotten much better at it yet. No, that's why I'm working at the emotional level. If you feel it, if you feel empathy, and if you on top of that feel compelled to act on your caring, then if you feel that you cannot behave differently. Give you an example, like, and I like to take it to a simple example that is not so complex, but let's say your best friend's mother dies, and to empathy, would you, like emotional empathy, would you make you feel sad, her sadness, right? Her sadness would resonate with you, and so on. But you might, that makes you care, but you might not do anything about it yet, and that wouldn't help your friend, right? But compassion would actually make you call her or say, how can I help? You might drive over there and ring the door and take her in your arms and comfort her. You might stay overnight to be just there to make sure she is safe. You might cook her a meal, maybe for multiple days even. So that's really where you move from caring to compassion. And so that's the important characteristic is, first of all, that it is outward. You lead with the goal to have others in mind, the well-being of others in mind. It can include yourself. It doesn't mean you have to sacrifice yourself and not do well and only the others. So it includes yourself, but also you want others to be doing well, and you actually act on it.
Well, it is important. The action of acting, if I can say that, upon your caring is actually the compassion. In other words, doing something about it. And your third essential leadership behavior emotion is interest. You say the drive to understand. Okay, we've all heard this. Seek to be understood, right? And so that, and Bucky Fuller used to say this, I don't want to leave people misunderstanding me. I want people to understand. And you state trying to understand before the act is important advice for anyone, but critical for leaders. You tell a story about a woman from one of your seminars that approached you and created a judgment without ever even knowing you. I think this story is kind of a very telltale sign of what people do that creates divisiveness. Okay. Can you tell the story and the importance of understanding first before we're judgmental? Because, you know, a lot of us are just all automatically making a judgment because something happened. We don't like it. We're going to do it.
Yeah, and it happens that, like, subconsciously, right? And in this case was I was at a seminar, multiple day seminar, and this lady, she was also a participant. I was a participant, and she came to me on the second day, and she said, can I talk to you? Can we have a private conversation, just the two of us, like where we're by ourselves? And then as we approached that place and found a place to talk, tears starting to run down her face, her eyes. And I said, what's going on? And she said, well, when I first heard you speak, when I first heard your accent, I hated you. I instantly hated you. And I want to apologize for that. Because by now I got to know who you are a little bit better, and I feel bad about that I hated you. And so I said, what is it about? And she said, well, I'm Jewish, from a Jewish family, and half of my family was died in the Holocaust, and the other half were refugees. They escaped to Israel, what later became Israel. And but they all suffered, and it is still carried on. And that suffering, that multi-generational suffering, I still carry that with me, and so on. And she explained, I'm not using the exact same word she's using, but in summarizing it. And I was so grateful that she told me this story, because I had no idea. I had no idea what effect I had. And the interesting thing is that during that seminar that went then over a year period repeatedly, there were 3 other women that were also Jewish that came out to me and talked to me and said, me too. Me too, in terms of I'm Jewish too. And everybody had a different story and a different, but that can happen to anybody who carries something from the past with them. But as it comes to understanding and interest, the important thing was this woman in the book, I think I call her Nancy. It's not the real name. She made an effort to get to know me, and that changed her perspective about me. So that's the important thing. That
quite the point. That's the point.
Right. The point of that is cultivating interest. If we have reaction, and I coach also and train, in cross-cultural learning, cross-cultural competencies, and postponing judgment and assuming good intent are two behaviors that I coach people on, that give you a little bit time to get to know somebody. You can take and you can listen, you can ask questions, and that makes all the difference.
It shows that because of a past experience, how quick people are to create a judgment about someone, in this case it was you, that was a negative judgment as a result of your sound of your voice. You were just talking, I have a German accent, I'm German, so they knew that, and they connected the two without ever getting to know you. But again, as you said, they reached out in compassion, now better understanding you, and resolved the issue. And that's what we're talking about here. Now, in your state in the 4th essential behavior, that a vision aligned with our higher aspiration provides purpose and direction, which generates deep and sustained commitment to act toward the vision. And you call it, well, it's the optimism, the lens of visioning. You have a little chart in the book, actually. Speak with us about the vision to build a software company within HP, and how you were met with negativity from, in this case, you call the guy Carl, one of the HP employees. And what were the lessons learned, and how successful was this vision for HP? Because you helped to build a huge software division for them.
Yeah, so that is a very telling example, a telling story that repeats itself again and again. And if we don't have optimism, if we have there's emotions that hold us in the back, that all our mental energy is focused on the past, or we can free ourselves and shift out of these emotions that open the door then to emotions of the future, hope, optimism, enthusiasm, ambition, things like that, that allows us to look in the future and pursue a better future. So now at that time, I did not consciously know that. I studied that later, and when I went into coaching, and how do I teach somebody to become optimistic, because that's the foundation for seeing a vision of a better future and pursuing it. Now, in this situation, I was just newly hired to HP. I consciously joined HP in order to work in software, because I had worked in hardware, in computer science, and for a long time, and said this was the future, and I wanted to be part of that future and help to shape that future. So I was assigned to a task force. HP was a hardware company, didn't have software businesses, and there was to a small task force to help develop a strategy and a business plan for starting a software business, and that was out of Germany. And so we were locked away in a room, and once in a while we came out and had a coffee. This was an open space office. And as I just got the coffee from the coffee machine, somebody introduced himself, and it was a very open and friendly, environment and so on. And he introduced himself, and he asked me who I was and what I was doing. And so we did all that. And then I said, well, I'm building helping to build $1 billion software company. And I need to tell you, the reason for the billion was at that time, there was no $1 billion software company anywhere in the world, Microsoft not, or Oracle and all these, SAP, all these big companies. They were far from that. That's why it was such, and it was for me a representation of something big, something unbelievable, that like, a dream, and there was all kinds of good things associated with it. But I blurted it out of my unconscious mind, and he looked at me like a deer in the headlight and shook his head, and he said, Carl said, that's the name I gave him in the book. I said, young man, you're in the wrong place here. We don't do software here. And the point is that with that mindset, you cannot look into the future and create anything different, right? You can only work from what you have. Now, I instinctively knew that I had to be optimistic. I had no clue at that moment how somebody can build $1 billion software business, because nobody in the world had ever done it, right? And also, I was also aware this is not something I'm building alone. I'm part of a team, and this becomes, a larger and larger organization. The point is, 24 years later, when I left HP, when I moved on to start my own company, executive coaching firm, HP software business had grown to $4 billion. And it was one of the 5 largest software companies in the world, along with Microsoft and those big companies and so on. So it was possible, but I did not know at that time how is this going to happen. We had to figure that out. But the optimism that allows you to think big, to dream big, and to see a vision, to create a vision, is the foundation for creating positive change.
Well, they used to say, that of all the people, Steve Jobs was radically curious. And so what's the difference between being curious and radically curious? It was almost like it was embedded in every fabric. And as you said, when you want to find a solution to something, building $1 billion organization, having optimism, having a vision, you have to hold that in your mind's eye. You don't know how you're going to get there. Steve Jobs didn't know how he was going to get there. He didn't know that at the time Apple would be the company that it is today, or whatever. But you holding that and then saying that to somebody, and then somebody's telling you this is not the place to do it, is really the point, right? It's like, can't we have this optimism for a vision of the future, no matter how long it takes? It's the same thing with climate change. Can we have the optimism for clean water, clean air, great places for people to live, an environment which is thriving, and a reduction in all the devastation from the things that are occurring because of CO2 emissions? And I say we can, and it's not too late. And I think we still need to work on that. And with that, you mentioned that mobilizing is the 5th of the 7th essential behavior leadership competencies, and it builds on previous 4 behaviors. You state that the inspiration is the energy for mobilizing, and that a leader plays an essential role in energizing his or her people. What are the 3 characteristics of inspiration, and how can leaders inspire their people? Because if there's one thing that leaders are always looking to do, It's how do I inspire these people toward this great vision and to keep holding that vision and to be engaged in it no matter how many obstacles they hit along the way?
Yeah, this is a very important question, and I have to say again, back to the vision itself and optimism, there is no alternative to not being optimistic. We have to believe that we can overcome those big challenges that threaten our future. There's no alternative to it other than having not a future,
Right.
right? So that's important to say. So can we choose not to be optimistic? No, we cannot. We need to shift to optimism because that opens possibilities. Now back to inspiration itself. Inspiration, this has three characteristics that comes out of emotional psychology. Basically, one is evoke inspiration. You invoke inspiration. And the way you do it is by linking what to speaking to people's highest aspirations. Okay, so we talk about higher needs that are bigger than themselves, that go beyond their ego, right? Something that they cannot not do. Like the work that I'm doing, I cannot not do. I have to do. There's no
Right.
choice.
Right.
Okay,
I know that
right,
one. Yeah.
right. This is so. Like for the East Germans, when they created a peaceful revolution, it was freedom and democracy. They could not do that. They could maybe postpone it, yes, but they had to have that. Okay, that spoke to their highest aspiration. Now, the second one is really in terms of inspiration that creates where you create an awareness, you inspire an awareness of new possibilities. So those speaking back to, let's say, climate change, right? Let's say maybe people don't see, they say, yes, we want to have to stabilize the climate so that the earth is livable. And I don't know how, but inspiring the awareness of new possibilities. And that's also the role of the leaders. That's the role of those that understand, that have created the understanding. And it's a creative process, right?
Yes.
So the creative people that in any field of creativity and painting and writing and making movies, whatever, or inventing new things, they have to have that. They have the awareness of sudden awareness of new possibilities. That's the second type of inspirational characteristics. And the third one that's more focused on how do you pursue, how do you put something in reality, which is called approach motivation. So you inspire somebody to make something happen that you believe in, that your vision becomes a reality. And so these are the three characteristics.
Well, again, you have these 7 essential. Now, for all of our listeners, we're not going to get to all 7 in the time frame. I'll just tell them that up front. But what they can do is they can go out and get a copy of the book, Aspire, from Reiner Lomb. But we're going to sum up this interview with this, Reiner. The book is filled with great stories. At the end, it's takeaways and contemplation, and the summaries of each chapter, and then the pauses, the way you give people opportunity to pause, to think about a question. I love how you did that. And for all the listeners, the summaries and the pauses are really, really important to get at the back of each chapter here. Now, if there were 3 takeaways from Aspire that you would want to leave the listeners with, what would they be and why? In other words, 3 main points from your book.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think any of your listeners can create and lead positive change. Anyone, no matter where you are. Okay, so that's one lesson. The second is, in order to create positive change, you need to influence or change behavior, starting with your own behavior. Okay, so
very important.
Changing your own behavior, adjusting your own behavior, you can influence the behavior of others, and you can increase the circle of influence continuously. Okay, so you can scale your impact that way, but you can always change one person. You can start always with one person. That's the second one. So change in behavior, in order to create positive change, starting with your own one. The third one is really changing behavior requires a shift in emotions. And shift and shifting emotions requires an awareness of the emotional state that you are in. Is that helpful for what I tried the behavior I want to show right now in that specific leadership situation or not? And if not, what is the emotion I need to shift to? And that is learnable. You can learn to create that awareness. Is this emotion useful or not? Which one is useful? Like the ones you just, like, for example, you lead a team saying, do I need to, the team is not motivated, they're not performing well. Do I need to inspire them more? Right? Maybe I'm doing something that is not inspiring. So the third one is really that in order to create a shift, like a change in behavior, you need to shift your emotions. You need to learn to shift your emotions, and that is learnable. And the book Aspire shows you how.
It does. And I would say one of the things that we get caught up in, and I'll leave the listeners with this, you know, we are emotional beings. He's talking about emotions here, the emotion of caring and compassion and, you know, inspiring, all of these. But inside ourselves, when something triggers, frequently the emotion will take hold, and we'll say something we wish we hadn't said to someone or something. And I've always found, and I've heard this from many authors before, that if you pause and take a breath prior to your response, that your response is going to be a lot better received than it would be if you literally just got emotional about it. Because it's that emotion of anger. So if you think about it, you got angry right now, but you instead paused, took a breath, thought about it, and then thought through your response, you wouldn't have the high levels of conflict. That's a definite one for certain. So don't get caught up in your emotions. What Reiner is teaching here is a way for people to shift those emotions and turn it into compassionate. It always reminds me of, if you've ever watched the training videos from Herb Kelleher at Southwest Airlines. He always used to talk about love. Now, love isn't said very much inside business, but if we would all, I know this is going to sound cliche, but if we would all learn to love one another, which is these words that you're using, compassion and caring, are very close to the word love, we would find that we would resolve many of our problems. And Reiner, it's been a pleasure having you on Inside Personal Growth, spending some time with my listeners about your great book. I'm going to pull it across again and just give you another opportunity to make sure that you all go out and get this book. We'll put a link to it, and we'll put a link to Reiner's website as well. Thank you so much for being on Inside Personal Growth.
Thank you. The pleasure is all on my side, Greg. It was really fun to talk to you and very enlightening. Thank you.
Thank you so much. You take care. Namaste to you.
You too. Thank you.